Thank you all for braving the snowy Pittsburgh weather. This was unexpected. I don't even know if the Weather Channel knew that the snow was going to happen, but yes, thank you for being here. Today I'm going to go over the cold start problem, which is essentially creating network effects within startups and scaling that from scratch. I'm first going to tell you about why this is relevant to me and my startup. Do I need to?
I was clicking Zoom. See that.
Oh, perfect. So why is this relevant to Hardly? We have a career management hub platform. We are making career management more affordable and accessible to people outside of the university environment, like yourselves. And our main goal is to get career fulfillment. And a lot of people ask about our name, Hardly, what that means. It's off of the pun, working hard or hardly working. We want people to feel like they're hardly working in their career, because if you're doing what you love, that's what it feels like. So in this process, we offer tools, assessments, and support that simplify career planning. Where we are in the startup process, we had a successful beta test last year in the summer that validated that we were able to get revenue. It's really important, and will come up later in this presentation. And then we launched publicly earlier this year. We have 11 coaches, 116 members, $1,000 worth of revenue, and under 300K of funding. So we are still pretty fresh and new, but we also went through a ton of twists and turns to get here. And the cold start problem, the book, was actually really integral in our success in terms of finding product market fit and our correct target. So where the cold start problem, growing network effects, comes into play with us is we believe that the core of our revenue growth will come from talent recruitment and career services for businesses in the future, because of course, B2C is a little bit of a slower growth process. But there's plenty of willingness to pay here once we have the talent. So how do you get the talent in order to provide value to businesses and get that revenue when you don't really have anything to offer the talent just by themselves? So that's where we started looking at alternative revenue streams and alternative launch strategies. So our current revenue is coming from coaching services to individual professionals within our career management hub. So it's the classic chicken and egg situation. You need a large talent pool to offer recruitment value to businesses, and talent wants plenty of businesses to choose from. So how do you solve for this? That's where the cold start problem comes in. And it's probably the weirdest question you're going to get all week, but does anyone have any idea about what meerkats have in common with startups? I always get some weird answers on this, so please try. Okay, cool. We had one guy over the weekend that was like, they both look at the horizon. And I was like, that is super creative and I love it. It's not the answer, but I always enjoy people's answers to that. What meerkats have in common with startups is the social effect, the alley effect. Walter Clyde Alley was one of the founding fathers of American ecology. And he studied social animals in particular. So what's unique about meerkats and a few other social animal species is that once they get above a certain threshold, the alley threshold, the growth rate of the population skyrockets. And once they get below a certain threshold, the growth rate is pretty much non-existent. They all die off. And why is that? Because a small isolated population might have less defenses, there's less genetic diversity, so it allows some genetic defects to keep inbreeding. There's less reproduction, all of those things that are just not great for survival if you're a meerkat or a sardine or anything that has that relies on a larger population to keep them safe. But the same thing happens with startups that are reliant on network effects. So there's customer isolation that leads to lower value, bad reviews, high churn, reduced growth, few customers. Basically, all network startups begin in the extinction vortex. And that is definitely not the best route to go to. You don't want to spiral into the death spiral. But some of the biggest and most successful startups in the world are network-based startups. And a lot of times people think of network-based startups as social media. And yes, that is a network-based startup. There's so many more types out there. There's data network-focused startups like Glassdoor. Think about going onto Glassdoor and not seeing anything relevant to you. You would just exit Glassdoor. That's the extinction vortex for Glassdoor. Interaction startups like WhatsApp. If none of your friends use WhatsApp, what's the point of WhatsApp? Marketplace startups like eBay, Upwork, Lyft, you have to have buyers and sellers on the network. And then of course, the platform-based startups, which if you think about Shopify, they provide services to businesses to create websites, but they also have like a huge suite of apps that are created by developers. And in order to provide more value to those businesses, they have to have the suite of apps and developers to do that. So all of these are network-focused startups. Why would you even want to start a network-focused startup when it's so much easier to do one that is not network-focused? Well, for instance, you have a seller and buyer here. This is not a network-based startup. It's really easy to copy. So if it's easy to start and get off the ground, you run into more competition and more issues along the way. But if it's hard to start, it's also really, really hard to copy. So once you do scale that network effect, it's going to be much harder for competitors to take you over. You're going to have a much stronger moat. So getting back to Hardly just for a bit, this is our dashboard where you can see all your tasks and progress on your career. We finalized a new talent acquisition assessment in June 2021. And we thought that businesses would be really excited and want to lay down cash to us, of course. We got actually a ton of LOIs, a lot of letters of intent saying that they were going to purchase Hardly once it was available. So we created it. The problem is that our talent recruitment pool was very, very low. And also businesses didn't really want they were so desperate for people to hire that they really didn't want the assessment. They didn't want to take out anyone out of the pool. So even though they signed LOIs, they really didn't mean it. And that is the conundrum of doing research without a product yet. But we took a step back and we looked at who really cares about what we're building and made a list. We had professionals, career coaches, businesses, recruiters, and universities. And we asked the question, where can we really provide the most value the fastest? And who is taking our assessment? We had tons, we had like almost 1,000 people taking our assessment over a very short amount of time. And barely anybody was looking for a job. They were looking for career fulfillment. They wanted to get to know themselves better, what type of environment they worked in the best. So they were doing it pretty much for themselves. And we discovered that there was something there that was driving growth that was unrelated to the talent process, but maybe we could build our talent pool larger in order to go into that recruiting realm, which is going to make us more money down the line. So whose need can we solve the fastest? Career coaches really want consistent clients and professionals really want to feel fulfilled. So we identified these two parties in our launch strategy because that was the fastest value that we could provide. And of course, we're going to expand to all of these. But in terms of where we begin to build our network, this is where we are. So we proved out the beta test. People are paying us, successful beta, new strategy, yay. And getting into the book, The Cold Start Problem, I'm not going to go through all of this just because I feel like this is the part where a lot of you all are at, right at the beginning, the most difficult part, honestly, right before the tipping point, that Ailey effect that we were talking about earlier. And we can go through the rest of the book if you really like this presentation. So first step, there's 5 steps in total. First step is to build an atomic network. You're going to want to start here. You're going to want your network to be moderately sized immediately, but that's not going to happen. I wish it happened. It doesn't happen like that. You're going to actually start here. One node to another, And it's going to be you providing a lot of value to the smallest amount of people possible. So using Uber as an example, they were not thinking in terms of their atomic network, their smallest amount possible being San Francisco or New York. Now they're thinking globally, but at the moment that they began, they thought of their atomic network as 5 p.m. at the corner of 5th and King Street in a specific neighborhood in San Francisco. And that's where they could add value. They were chasing down people looking for taxis and convincing them to download Uber on their phone, and they were manually trying to get people to take them places. Once that was established, once they had a network of people that were expecting to use Uber when they went to that corner, that's when they expanded to the rest of the neighborhood, eventually San Francisco, and we know the rest of the Uber story from there. So what do you think is Slack's atomic network? Slack is obviously another network-based company. Somebody throw out a number. 5, that's a good guess. Well, I'm gonna not tell you the answer just yet. So building an atomic network with Slack actually started off as a video game. I'm not sure if y'all knew that, but it started off as Glitch. There were like a bunch of trolls. People were meant to build this enormous world together, but they didn't have their launch strategy down pat at all. Basically, a lot of gamers were going into Glitch and there was no one else there. It was an empty room, and then they would leave. What's the point of being there if no one's playing it with you? So they started tanking. And the CEO had a ton of investors that he, of course, was on the hook for. And he asked, like, what do we have? Like, what is interesting about the products that we've made? And it turns out that the developers at then Glitch had created an easy way for them to communicate with each other. It was very basic code, but then they created it accessible to the marketing team, the sales team, and the entire company was using this chat product in a more visual way than what developers were used to. So they were like, oh yes, maybe we should sell this. We already have it, let's make it better. And they identified 3 people as the atomic network within a company that they had to convince in order for it to grow. And why 3? Of course, I feel like the logical thing is to say like 2 people, but there's so many other substitutes when you think of 2. Like, people can text each other, they can email. There's not that many substitutes at this time for 3 people. That's where Slack starts to add value over the competition in communication within a business. So once you build your atomic network, you can identify the hard side of your network. With Uber, does anyone have an idea of what the hard side of the network would be? Is it the drivers or the riders? Yes, the drivers. Ding, ding, ding. So what defines the hard side of the network is they have to do more work to get caught up. They have complex workflows, and they usually expect some status related to their side of the network or financial benefits. In the Uber's case, of course, it's financial benefits. They're wanting to make that money. What is the hard side of the network for Twitch? Thinking of streamers or viewers. Streamers, yes. So when Twitch started, Justin, I always forget his last name because I always think of him as Justin TV. But when Justin started Twitch, he started thinking, oh, I'm going to poach a lot of creators from YouTube in order to get more streamers on my platform. But why was this a horrible idea?
Yeah, not all the benefits that you
different skill set is involved. And they also didn't have all the same benefits, you're right. But the skill set was what created the problem. Because if you think about editing and what makes a really good YouTuber creator, then it's different from what makes a really good streamer. It's not the same entertainment. You have to think on your feet as a streamer. So he started really focusing on developing the streamers that were already on the platform, educating them and investing in them. And there's a 1-10-100 rule for social startups, like Twitch in the case of their streamers, YouTube with their creators, or Uber with their drivers. 1% around that moment, 1% of your users are going to be your creators. They're going to be the people that are adding a ton of value to your platform. And around 10% are going to be the synthesizers. So think about Instagram, those are the people that are sharing posts all the time. They're super active. They may not be creating anything, but they're sharing it with their friends. They're commenting all the time. Those people add value to that 1%. And then the rest of the 100% are the consumers, also called lurkers in the social world. But you really want to make sure that those creators are taken care of and that you are building them up in a way that will prevent competition from taking them from you. Wikipedia notoriously has the smallest amount of creators on their platform. It's 0.02% of people that use Wikipedia actually contribute to Wikipedia, but that 0.02% are like completely nuts about it. They love it, they're passionate. So it's not necessarily about the number of people, the percentage of people that are creators. It's about the ratio of how much they really care within the group that you are fostering. So once you identify your hard side, then you want to grow that atomic network. And back to our Uber example, the founders of Uber started reaching a threshold. At this point, they were just doing black cars. They were purchasing a lot of cars. They weren't peer-to-peer yet. And they were limiting the Uber drivers to black cars in general. But they started asking, okay, what are the assets we need and who has them? We need more drivers. We need more cars. Who has them? A lot of other people have them. So that's when they started considering a peer-to-peer network after observing a LGBTQ plus nonprofit in San Francisco called Homobile, where they had a peer-to-peer ride system to pick up each other from parties and make sure that they got home safely. So they observed that, watched how they worked out, and then Uber adopted peer-to-peer. They went from black car to peer-to-peer, and that gave them more drivers, which increased their network capacity, which means more riders. What is the atomic network for Tinder? And I promise this is not a trick question. 2? Yeah, 2 people. That's all you need to have an atomic network. Of course, you want more options. You want diversity. You want it's better if the network is bigger. But really, you need to make sure that you have 2 people that like each other on that network. What is the hard side of the network with Tinder? Yes, it's a little confusing. Women are the typical hard side of the network for Tinder. And the reason why the previous dating apps, dating websites hadn't been working is because they hadn't been protecting the hard side of the network prior. So Match.com, there's a few other websites that existed before Tinder. The women would come on board, 1 billion men would message them all at once, and then they would get out of there. They would not come back because it was overwhelming and there was no gateway. Tinder created a gateway with the double opt-in. You both have to say yes to each other before you meet, and that protected women enough to where they felt comfortable staying on. So how did they scale? Does anyone know where they went to first? It was colleges, and I will tell you a story about that in a second. What is the atomic network for Airbnb? Yeah. Perfect. Yes, exactly that. You just need a host and you need someone that wants to stay at that host place. What is the hard side between those 2? Exactly. The host is the harder side. It's the side that Airbnb became really focused on taking care of. They not only educated the host, but they offered photography, free photography of their places to make them look beautiful in the listings. They took care of their host so much that when competitors did come onto the market that had more resources, more financial backing, all of that, Airbnb's hosts stayed with Airbnb because they loved them so much. How did they scale? Airbnb actually started with conventions. They would go to, if there was any large convention around the US, they would go around that convention center because it's always insanely expensive to get a hotel anywhere near, and they're almost always sold out. They went around to the host or the people that live near that convention center, convinced them to be host, and kept them on the platform for that convention stay. And then number 4, after you grow your atomic network, you make it accessible. This is the freemium model. And why does freemium make so much sense for this? Because of course, when you are creating a network-based startup, the more value you can add depends on how fast you can scale. The more people you have on, the more value. So Zoom knew that, and they created a free product, but it couldn't just be free because everyone, I don't know if everyone knows the story of Skype here, but if you're familiar with Skype, you're aware that it was a free product, but it was a horrible product. Like it just didn't function well. So it can't just be free. It has to be a killer product. And all of these below Zoom are killer products that also have a free aspect. So once you make it accessible, you have to orchestrate that first magic moment. And Tinder was amazing at this. They actually went to college campuses, found the most influential undergrads, usually within the sorority fraternity world, and they convinced them that they could pay for a huge party for them to host. So Tinder hosted these huge parties that were wonderful and incredible, but those influential people were put at the door, and they were told to not let anyone in the party unless they had Tinder on their phone. So downloading Tinder the next morning, people, met cute girls, hot guys, whatever they're into, and they forgot their names. And of course they look at Tinder and those people are there. Like everyone at the party from the night before were there. That's a magic moment of realizing the value of Tinder, because the people that you want to get a hold of and in touch with are on that app. LinkedIn was also really great with their launch strategy. Because they did it invite only. When you think about the value that they're trying to offer with LinkedIn, you want to expand your network. That's why you're on LinkedIn. So when you accepted that invite on LinkedIn, you already knew people in your network were there because it's an invite only network. So their launch strategy of invite only aligned perfectly with the value that they were giving, made sure that people had that magic moment as soon as they got on LinkedIn and saw people that they already knew. So these are the 5 steps. This is just the beginning of the book. This is literally going from cold start to the tipping point. So if you are into specifically corporate entrepreneurship, then you might be more interested in this escape velocity where you're really growing quickly, identifying segments of your target, and kind of changing your strategy according to the segments. Of course, you want to get beyond that ceiling. They talk a lot about competition and how to overcome competition. That's where the Airbnb story came in. So I fully recommend that you continue going through the book. My other recommendations, these are books that I really wish I knew about before starting on this entrepreneurship journey 3 years ago. The Mom Test, I cannot recommend enough. It is really, really actionable stuff around customer discovery. So asking the right questions so you don't get bullshit answers. Because people love to tell you what you want to hear. This book teaches you how to avoid those questions, those leading questions. David and Goliath, great book about the underdog, the startup overcoming the big, massive company, and a bunch of other metaphors along those lines. A more beautiful question is, around trying to get back to that observational open-mindedness around asking questions, and something that you're going to need as a startup founder. Hooked, it has a little bit, I have to admit, I was a little bit in a moral quandary when I read Hooked, because I was like, do we really want to make super addictive products? Yes, no, maybe. But either way, it's fascinating how to make addictive products. And gamifying, there's a lot of different strategies in that book. And Startup CEO, it's from a serial entrepreneur about all the lessons that he learned along the way. And it is just really good knowledge. So I would love to take any questions that you have. And please go sign up for a Hardly account. It's free. Do we have any questions online?
Online, we don't have any right now. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through like your lessons learned as you went through those 5 steps, identifying your talent? I know you said who your talent was, but what did you like try first? How did you realize
I think we tried everything, which is something I would not. I don't know if we could have avoided it at the time. I hadn't read this book yet, but it was a lot at first. It was a lot of thinking of our startup in terms of it already being scaled, and not enough about how do we get to that scale. So we were thinking, how can we be different from what is out there? What's our competitive moat? But without thinking how we were going to get to that position where we could be different from everyone. And we realized one day that our end goal can be different from where we are right now. A lot of companies started out like that. Like LinkedIn currently is making a ton of money from, of course, advertising, recruitment, sales. But at the beginning, they were just focused on building their network. It wasn't, the plan was always to make money in those directions, but it wasn't their main goal to begin with. It was just to build. So even if your long-term value proposition is this big, scalable, beautiful thing, you also have to think about the ways that you're going to get there. And that was the mistake that we made early on, not thinking about the whole picture. Any other questions?
One online.
Yeah.
What would you say is Hardly's value proposition, and where are you going next?
Great question. So long-term, just in line with my last answer, long-term, our value proposition is to make career management simpler so more people can have more fulfillment in their career. And we will be pulling together all of the assessment results, all of the tools, all of the support that you need in one place. So you don't have to scramble all over the internet in order to figure out what you want to do in your next step. And it really is applicable to people that are 22 or 62. We actually had a woman on our platform using Hardly tools, assessments, in order to plan out what she wanted to do with her retirement. So at any point in your life, you are at a career transition. It's not just the beginning, it's at every single stage. But in terms of our big vision later on, like that's where we will be. Right now, we are concentrated on building that magic moment. I realize I didn't answer every single step of your question, but part of what we're focused on right now is that number 5 step of building the magic moment and getting people in so they can see that they have a connection with a coach. We're growing our coaching team to make sure that everyone that comes in can identify with someone that is on the coaching staff, whether it be their background in industry, their location. There's a lot of different factors that people are attracted. So we want to create that magic moment between a coach and a user right now, but eventually it'll be user to user once we scale, and then that'll eventually transition into the broader value proposition. Yeah.
I joined the lecture panel today, so I'm not sure if you already covered this, but I just want to understand how you came across this problem space that you want to work on, and how you knew that you're the right person to solve the problem, and how you validate like you spoke about data, and how it will work on, and but what do you do after that to sort of validate more?
Of course. Yeah, my background is in marketing and branding. So it was a unexpected twist of us going into career development. And it was the reason why we ended up there is because partly my co-founder and I both had experiences along our career that we wish that we could have avoided with the right expertise. My co-founder and I both don't have family members that are within our industry or where we ended up working in New York City. So we kind of had to go on our own for a long time. And we really wish that we knew that we could have reached out to an executive coach. And honestly, like part of the inspiration came up from me enjoying personality assessments and all of these assessments that you can take to, discover yourself a little bit more. And I always lose them like all over my computer. I will, I have to track them down 3 years later in my email. And just having like one succinct place, I felt would de-stress a lot of the components of career management that were making me, scatterbrained. So a lot of it was, we created a tool that we wanted to really use. And then we brought a lot of people together, our coaches and advisors that were experts in this space. So we don't have to be experts. In fact, sometimes it's actually an advantage for us not to be, because it puts us in the position to where we can ask all the dumb questions that an expert in the space would never be able to get away with. So we can question a lot more and think more abstractly because we didn't get trained in career development, but we pulled together a lot of people that have been. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, there's one more follow-up. So when you're validating the problem space,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you guys would have looked at other competitor products or similar products.
Yes.
So if you see something that's already working and it has like a good traction, so do you still do user research or do you just go and build it and then like build on top of it?
It is in our mind, whenever we see a competitor, it's a mixture of happiness and like absolute terror. Because of course, you don't want to be exactly the same as them, but it's always good to have people in like other competitors in your space. That means that somebody's making money and there's a reason why they're there. So don't be afraid of competition. Make sure that you're differentiated in some way. And the freemium model is definitely something that we haven't seen. And the competition typically will take some components of career support and management, like they'll just do coaching or they'll just do assessments, but pulling them all in one place is where we are differentiated. And I would say that some of the biggest questions that we've had is how much do we play nicely with competitors? There's that whole phrase of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. If we can somehow work in like their assessments, their tools into our platform to where we're adding value to them by pulling everyone's together, then all of a sudden we're an asset to them. And it doesn't make sense for them to run us out of the market because we're giving people to them. We're sending people to their website. So I would say competition and differentiation is a bit of a waltz. And there's going to be some steps forward and steps back. But once you start developing your intuition around what's right for your startup, then you'll know the right dance to dance. That's a weird metaphor, but I hope you get it.
Just one last question. How much time did it take you guys to find some sort of product market fit?
How long did it take?
Yeah.
Forever. I feel like it's just an ongoing process. We started off completely different from where we are today. And we iterated at each phase of, okay, they don't want to pay for this. Oh, they like this, but they're not willing to pay for it. There was a constant change over the course of about 2 years. I would say that our actual product started to become recognizable in summer of 2021. So within the past 2 years, we started really defining what it was. But at the beginning, it was a lot of trial and error. Yeah.
The presentation part is a really good story that
Okay.
my question is that
why did you not go with in-house coaches and decided to go with an expert?
That's a great question, and something that we're continuing to debate today. Because we look at startups like Noon, it's a weight loss app. They actually have all 3,000 of their coaches, they're employees of the company. It's not a network, it is employees. That has a lot of advantages, but the network model is also more scalable. We're able to get different types of coaches on board, where if we started hiring them full time, we might only be able to manage a couple at the beginning, and that might not be as big enough of a network to reach all the different types of people that we want to get to. So the contractor aspect, the more Uber model, allows more diversity in our staff, which means that we can reach more people in their coaching needs moving forward. Yeah.
It's a kind of related, but interestingly, how did you convince those first coaches to join the platform?
That is where business school comes in hand. You sell the vision. You show how passionate you are about it. And along the way, I was always very honest about like my shortcomings and what I didn't know. And I came to these coaches and I was like, I'm not an expert. I want to make the world a better place. And I want to change a lot of things for the better, but I'm not an expert in the space. So I need you. Would you be along for the ride with me? And a lot of them said, no, I need more money. And a few of them said yes. And the more that said yes, the easier it was to get the next person. So I want to say we started with like 2 or 3. I think by the time we did a beta, we had 6. And then I'm getting introduced to 8 more over the next 2 weeks, so it expands quickly once you get those few people on board with you. Yeah.
Can you talk about competitors for Harley?
Yes. At what stage? Because I feel like it's different competitors at different stages.
I would be interested. So like currently.
Okay. So BetterUp, which is a terrifying competitor to have because Prince Harry is on their like main C-suite staff. But BetterUp is one of the competitors that we currently have because they are really focused on coaches. However, their main focus is B2B. Right now, we're scaling B2C. And so far, we've heard a lot of positive feedback on that because if people see Hardly as something that they could have for the entirety of their career, they trust us more, they invest more time in making Hardly their career hub home. But BetterUp is more focused on B2B, which means once that person's done at that job, BetterUp's not being paid for anymore. There's no reason for them to come back. They don't have access to it. So we're trying to get a more consistent market over time, whereas BetterUp's getting paid through businesses. So it's more of like they're the hub. We want to be the spoke. And another is startup that is a little bit ahead of us, but not much, is Minto.io. They are a coaching startup and they're focused on getting other startups to pay them. So they do have a B2C component. Our assessments and tools were more focused on building the self-driving aspect of it, the self-directed components, so we can scale faster. They don't have anything that is offered for free. So they don't have a freemium model at all. Really, BetterUp doesn't either. It's very rare in this space to have any sort of free option before you get to the coaching component. Yeah.
A lot of startups go through accelerator programs at the start.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been reading like good and negative comments about like being in an accelerator program at the start where you actually need to work with more customers more than participating on this.
Mm-hmm.
I also thought you guys were part of the venture program. Like, how did that help? And what are the things that you guys thought of from the whole program?
So yes, we were part of Venture Bridge, and it was really helpful because I think accelerators and incubator programs, they force you to be accountable. A lot of startups, it's easy to kind of flail around and get in your own head. and be productive, but not actually be productive. Like focus on the stuff that doesn't matter. Because all of a sudden, you know, you're managing your time and your startup's only going to grow with how you manage your time. So accelerator programs and incubator programs, I found to be really, really helpful for accountability and helping you refocus on what is actually going to get you to the next stage of your startup versus the stuff that you think matters, but isn't actually important in the long run. I would say that the right stage to go into it is probably later than where we were, because we had pivoted so many times that by the time we started Venture Bridge, we hadn't solidified fully. And I think that we could have taken more advantage of Venture Bridge and the resources if we had, like, if we were 6 months ahead of where we were at that time. Any other questions?
If you have an online question.
Yeah.
How do you test your atomic network? Test if the value you see it brings is also valuable to others.
You build it and then you see. With my background in marketing and focus groups and all the research, I thought that I could validate it through talking to people. And of course, that's a huge component of getting to where you need to be in order to build it. But you're not going to really know for sure who finds the most value in what you're doing until you put it in front of somebody and ask them, what do you like about this? What interests you? Because we got such surprising answers. We thought we were building something for one reason. And then once we started asking them questions around why they liked it, it was completely different reasons. So it's important to get out of your own head and build something, even if that something is not the final version of it or is not even good. It's just more realistic for people to react to something in a truthful way if it's in front of them instead of it being conceptual.
And then last question, someone wants to know if you're offering any summer internships.
We are. Yes, they should send me their resume.
Okay.
Anything else in here? Great. Oh, yes.
What do you think about LinkedIn as a competitor?
They are eventually going to be our big competitor because we, in our big vision, it's not like we're not necessarily going to be defined as a social network, but there's a lot of social components to our company. So it's kind of links back to his question, but our strategy will most likely involve playing nicely with LinkedIn and trying to flow people back and forth instead of fighting against, because they're so established. And until they have their Achilles heel that we can attack, it's better to be friends. Does that make any sense? Or is there another way that you'd like me to answer that question?
I was also thinking about alternatives for users.
Okay.
Not business competitors.
Alternatives for users in terms of career management?
Yeah. Career management, coaching, mentorship.
Yes. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of competitors for different components. And LinkedIn, I want to say, is definitely one of the strongest competitors in terms of bringing a lot of pieces of the puzzle together. Whereas LinkedIn is really big and sprawly, we want to be tighter. Like we want to build smaller, tighter networks to where your connections on Hardly would be only the people that you've interacted with in workshops, coaching sessions, or you specifically had their code in order to ask them to be a friend. LinkedIn gets really spammy very quickly. We don't want to be like that at all. We want every single person in your network to truly add value to your career experience. And if you haven't interacted with them after a certain point, they disappear. We don't want you to have access to if they're not going to be super helpful. So unless you add them as a permanent connection, they go out of your Hardly network after 3 months.